Welcome to Planning for Success, Strategic Planning to Build a Comprehensive Recycling Program, a College and University Recycling Coalition webinar. My name is Kay Johnston, and I direct the Office of Sustainability at the University of Missouri, Kansas City, and I'll be your moderator today. This webinar is part of our free CURC technical webinar series, which are designed to provide trends, information, and perspective about recycling. We are hosting these webinars every other month on the first Thursday from 1 p.m. to 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. On the next slide, before we get started, I want to thank today's program sponsor, Waste Management, as well as the Alcoa Foundation for their sponsorship of the 2015 webinar series. Their support allows us to make these free webinars possible. We also want to thank Keep America Beautiful and ASHE, which is the Association for the Advancement of Sustainability in Higher Education, for the planning and promotional support for the series. Today we have a few housekeeping notes to go over for today's webinar. If you have technical problems during the webinar, you can call GoToWebinar's customer support line at 1-800-263-6317. Because of the size of the audience, all of your lines are muted, but you can submit questions at any time using the questions panel on the right side of your screen. Simply click the plus symbol to type your question, and we will read these out loud when we get to the end of the presentation. Sometimes if there's questions that are pertinent to an individual presenter, we may also at that time go to that question. If you have a note to share with the organizers, use the chat function at the bottom of your control panel to send us a note to us. One final housekeeping note. We will be placing the slides and a recording of the webinar on the CURC site within the next few days. This is so that you can review the session or share it with your colleagues. All right, let's get started now. On this slide, we talk about today's webinar is focused on strategic planning and the process different schools follow to grow and advance their recycling and zero waste program. It is one thing to set out recycling bins on campus, but to make a significant impact to recover more than a small fraction of the waste stream requires setting goals, taking stakeholder buy-in, securing sustainable funding, as well as a lot of patience and perseverance. We'll hear from 4 schools today sharing how they put these steps into practice. Starting with the University of Virginia, Jesse Warren will walk us through the process of how they designed their goals and strategies to move the campus towards zero waste. In order to design the goals, they first reviewed every aspect of the recycling collection process, from that moment when the user decides where to place the material, to the placement of bins and their signage, to the movement of materials from collection to market. And he will share how the progress of the newly implemented processes, how those processes have gone. Luis Campos and Asa Stone from the Central New Mexico Community College will present the evolution of recycling on their campus, which grew out of a desire from facilities to start a recycling program. Utilizing the RFP process, CNM requested bins to provide the campus of CNM with a comprehensive consolidated recycling program. Their process can serve as a guide to others to create transformational change. Dave Padgett's presentation covers the 10-year effort to establish the Tennessee State University Community University Recycling Drop-Off Center. From overcoming barriers to participation in recycling to gain the support of TSU's administration to establish a sustainable campus recycling program. Leanna Hauser with Johns Hopkins University will shed light on how important building how important building trust relationships among stakeholders is, and how to understand and approach colleagues to make lasting change on your campus. So we're going to have our opening slide with Jesse Warren. Jesse, who is the Sustainability Program Manager for Building and Operations at the University of Virginia. Jesse is responsible for the university's recycling, solid waste, electric demand response, and building sustainability programs. Jesse?
Thank you, Kay. I'd like to talk a little bit about the future of recycling at UVA. UVA is a large research institution located here in Central Virginia. We've got a large undergraduate population, but we've also got a School of Medicine and a full-service hospital to give us a total of about 44,000 folks. As we talk about this today, I'll be honest, this story has no clean conclusion. What you're really going to get is an over-the-shoulder look into our strategic planning process. Next slide, please. As Kay mentioned, we're in the process of pulling together our sustainability plan. This is really a 5 to 10-year plan, but we're pulling together goals that are going to be in about the 15-year horizon. As we've pulled together these goals, we've started to assess the entire state of our program, which has led to, as she described, a number of changes. Next slide, please. So one of our first observations is that recyclables are going into the trash. This has come from our waste audits, and really this is a breakdown of the safety net, which is how we describe recycling as sort of the last line of defense to keep materials from getting into the landfill. We know that there's things that we want to be doing up the stream, but even this indicates to us that our safety net has holes in it. Next slide, please. Also, our containering around UVA lacks uniformity and consistency. We've grown a lot of this over time, back to about 1991, and we've added bins when and where we can. At this time, I think we're ready for a wholesale revamp of these containers, and this is really where this process started. We were thinking hard about our containering and what our users do with our process, and that eventually made us look at the entire thing from start to finish. Next slide, please. Now here at UVA, we source separate, or at least really we ask our participants to source separate. They divide paper and fiber into various grades, but then we commingle all of our bottles and cans where we sort them off-site. As many of y'all have learned, the change toward single stream recyclables has obviously changed the way we bring these materials to market, and as these articles describe, has presented a problem for some institutions. Next slide, please. But we're even fighting this here. Locally, our surrounding city and county have bought into either single stream recyclables or they've bought into what we call all-in-one can. Since that Dirty Murph nearby opened, there's been a lot of confusion about how this process works. And then, importantly, a lot of advertisements that are contrary to our source separation message. Next slide, please. Now, on the plus side, we do have a fully enclosed sort facility under construction. Previously, we had an open air facility back in our facilities yard. As that's growing and changing, we're actually being relocated off-site. It'll be about 5 or 10 minutes away, but it gets us out of the bigger hustle and bustle of the university. And more importantly, this facility will be enclosed on 4 sides, allowing us both better protection from the elements and taking away any potential stormwater concerns. Regardless, we expect this facility to open later this year. Next slide, please. As many of y'all have probably discovered, Campos wants to grow on our campus. We've had a lot of success doing it in the back of house and in dining halls, and we've also had some good success getting it out into events where we control the perimeter. Next slide, please. But as y'all have also know, contamination and sorting remain issues. Now, I pulled this slide together particularly to talk about compost. This is one of our post-football game sorts, but honestly, that's true for all of our recyclables. Across the board, contamination and sorting remain issues. Next slide. Thank you. So UVA recycling moves the materials out of the buildings. This is the part we really want to talk about here today. This is different because building services, what we call our internal housekeeping group, they're located in these buildings basically every day. Not everywhere they have 7-day-a-week coverage, but their job is to remain focused in these facilities. However, UVA recycling services all of the university. So we often come to these buildings only once a week to pick up their materials and take them out. That has caused some mismatches. But we, UVA Recycling, take material all the way from the user's desk all the way through to market. Next slide, please. Eventually, we really came to understand that 2 sets of personnel is really a barrier. First off, co-location is a real struggle as you think about what it takes for 2 sets of personnel to keep those containers married together. Secondly, as you can see in the slide on the slide to the right, our containers are really mismatched. The trash can that you see is serviced by housekeeping, and they're able to get to that as many times a day as they need to because they're already present in the space. The recycling bin, however, is oversized because we may not service this area as frequently. So if nothing else, that's led to a significant mismatch in our containers. Next slide, please. So to summarize, why are we going about making this change? First, we believe that we're going to get better co-location out of one set of footprints, as we're calling it. We believe that better co-location is going to lead to better choices and better recycling at UVA. We also want to see the wider adoption of compost, and we are not able to do that with our weekly service schedule that we have today. In addition, we feel that our containers are oversized. Our recycling containers are sized to hold a week's worth of materials. If we had someone in the building pulling those as needed, we could get away with much smaller containers. Furthermore, those beverage containers can sit for up to 7 days. From a pest and vector control standpoint, we'd like to see those move daily. And I have on here some notes about snow, and that's kind of unique to our operation, but I'm sure every one of you guys have issues around recycling in inclement weather. And getting to one set of footprints will certainly ease that on our campus. Next slide, please. So how did we go about starting to do all this? First, we started really talking about who needed to be involved in this planning process. At the center, I've got sustainability planning. That's really the sustainability brain trust who is thinking about the goals and the long-term vision for the university. Outside that, I have that next ring of operational and logistics folks. These are the folks who are actually going to be doing the job and responsible for handling the material day in and day out. And around them, I've got our customers and our stakeholders. This is everything from our typical participant, being that student or researcher who has something to dispose of, but we really wanted to talk to our high-volume generators, too. We wanted to talk to the guys who run the arena and the folks who work in the medical offices who are generating these high volumes of paper to see how we can make our process work better with theirs. And if we can remove those barriers and obstacles, well, that'll smooth the path to increased diversion. Next slide, please. So we developed roles for each of these groups. For the sustainability brain trust, I call it, we were involved in really developing that mission and vision and the milestones for what we're going to achieve. That group is also kind of responsible for running it up the flagpole to get the buy-in from the university as a whole. Secondly, we have our operations team. The operations team is really involved in creating the processes and helping train the folks university-wide who are going to have to undertake these new ways of doing business. And then our customers were really focused on listening. We really want to start by having them give us lessons learned and feedback so that they can be engaged in our change. We're starting that first by putting out a survey university-wide that looks at, I'll say, all of our users and understands where their desires and barriers are, as well as incoming students' potential expectations. We also want to have focus groups with some of those larger generators that I talked about. Like I said, the guys who run the arena and maybe some of the big offices that are generating large amounts of paper. We really want to think about listening as the first stage of engagement and outreach, so that survey and focus group is really going to be sort of step one in our outreach plan of how to push this university-wide. Next slide, please. So to kind of get all this to gel, we focused on a facilitated retreat. This retreat was put together by UVA's Institute for Environmental Negotiation and was 2 one-day workshops separated by about 2 weeks. We spent the first day focused a lot on sort of the state of how things are and how we want things to be, and then that gave us a week to spend some time doing some homework, and then we had a follow-up session focused on not just answering those questions, but also how we get into sort of adaptive change management as this process is ongoing. To that retreat, we brought, the heads and the folks in sort of all the groups that I'm talking about. So recycling was represented, as well as housekeeping, as well as landscape, and their respective management. Since we all report to the same director, it was pretty easy to get everybody in the same room, including that director. Next slide, please. And that's where we were able to really articulate our vision and our goals for this revamped system. The long-term goal for the vision for the university is zero waste, whatever that means. The long-term goal is zero landfill. And the short-term goals, as you see here, is to reduce the materials generated and purchased by the university and to reduce the materials sent to landfill. Obviously, we're working on sort of the front end. How do we buy less? But this conversation is focused on how do we reduce materials sent to landfill. Next slide, please. From that, we came up with what we called our guiding principles. We wanted to focus on the participant, the user first. And then we wanted to enable the operations to support that experience. This is different from the way we'd approached it in the past. In the past, we thought about, well, how do we make a great operation and things like that. But at this time, we're saying to ourselves, how do we make a great experience for the participant? And then we will work out how to make that operation work. Next slide, please. What this ended up with is our wish list, as I call it. This is everything that we want to see after this change is made. We want to get to what we call one set of footprints. That means that we don't have two sets of personnel servicing a building or two sets of personnel servicing an event. That means we have one set of footprints inside the buildings who are dealing with waste, and we've got one set of footprints outside the buildings that are dealing with waste. My conversation is really focused on the housekeeping side, but we're making the same change on the landscape side as well. Traditionally, landscaping is responsible for moving materials during special events like tailgating, and we're actually going to be the only set of footprints doing that starting at the Game Day Challenge next weekend when we play Syracuse. Our next wish list item was to see all containers co-located. As I said, that's been a struggle. I think many of y'all can sympathize with how that happens. But we felt that by having one set of personnel responsible for them, then that set of personnel would be responsible for keeping them together. We also want to see that all containers are emptied daily. We want consistent containering throughout UVA, and we want to continue having our participants sort. We talked a lot about whether or not source separation from our participants is really the right way for us, and simply put, we think it is. And this was a great ad as we went through the day. We want to make sustainability second nature for these folks. And so that's also one of our priorities. Next slide, please. So the first piece was how do we redesign these containers? To do so, of course, that had goals too. We don't want new containering to result in more work for housekeeping or to result in a lesser quality product that our customers see. So we want to make sure that we can preserve the aesthetics and the cleanliness of that space. We also want to make sure the signage is consistent across UVA. Right now we've got a lot of different people who feel responsible for that signage, from construction projects to individual dining halls, and we'd like to get some consistency there. We also really want the signage to be relevant to the user. You know, at UVA we have a lot of changing uses in our buildings. Like, take our dorms, for instance, our residence halls. Those are occupied full-time by those students 9 months out of the year, and then at the end of the year, they switch over to conference operations, as if they were a hotel. So how do we make the container redesign relevant to both of those constituencies? We also want to think about universal language. We've got many students here who are international. We really want to make sure that the wording we use is wording that makes sense, not abbreviations or jargon that might make sense to us, but not to the general public. In addition, we want to make sure we think through our future commodities like compost as we do this, and we want to think about how it's going to coordinate with our locality. Next slide, please. One of the things we're looking at hard are ergo cans. I like these a lot. What I like about them is that we can sort of create a module, and you can see the best practices that we've described up on the screen, but I'll just say that we really like the idea that we could work with our customers to sort of customize that graphics and the materials that are displayed on the graphics to reflect their space. So maybe at the law school, our signage is still very present, but a little more subdued. where over at athletics, maybe they want to have caveman on their trash can. Next slide, please. We also have to think a lot about how we're going to do exterior containering. Our exterior containering has been around for a while, and it needs to be revamped because we're designing a handoff. In the past, housekeeping didn't handle the materials. We went and picked it up, and then we took it all the way to market. Now they're going to have to hand it off to us outside of the building so that we can take it to market. It's also given us a chance to rethink the way material moves around our university and at the exterior. So this is one of our paper containers. As you can see, they're large roll-offs, and they're tired, as we would say. Next slide, please. We're also using rear load containers for cardboard. Next slide. We're using toters for plastic, glass, and metal. Next slide, please. And our compost is being handled by a vendor. Next slide. So in order to think about how all this comes together, we created these process flow charts. I'll be honest, I did this, and this was sort of a lot of work, but afterward, I had a really good handle on how all the material moves around UVA. So to read these charts, and my God, I won't ask you guys to read it in its entirety, you would start up at the top left corner and just ask yourself, okay, I have something to dispose of, and then move down. Is it white paper? Is it mixed paper? Is it cardboard, et cetera, et cetera? Then depending on whether the answer is affirmative or negative, you would move across the process. This is our current process. And as someone explained to me when I printed it out, if you've got to describe it like this, it's too complicated. So as we worked through this, we're really focused on how do we take steps out of this process and how do we remove handling steps in order to make this simpler and less labor-intensive along the way. We also had a lot of discussion about the left side of that flow chart, the diamonds, whether or not we should really have all those source separation options in all these different places. I'll say proceed from a process perspective. It makes a lot of sense for us to pull out cardboard early. We're still discussing how we can grade different fiber commodities. Those may end up more or less commingled depending on what the end result is. Next slide, please. So as we left that first facilitated session, what we really did was challenge those folks, okay, now it's time to fill in the middle. We're going to keep the front end similar to what our customers see, and we're going to keep the back end where we take it to market the same. And now it's time to completely recreate the center of the process. Next slide. So in order to think about doing that, we actually developed scenarios. We didn't want to just create one straw man that looked at how recyclables would move around UVA. We wanted to create many because we felt like, because this is so complicated, if we could flesh out what those scenarios looked like, the act of doing so would give us a much better understanding of where their strengths and weaknesses were. So after the first retreat and before the second one, we met to discuss what those scenarios would be. We pushed for 4 scenarios. The reason being that would allow us to test 2 different approaches to how we pick up this material from the exterior of the building, as well as describe 2 different areas where that would apply. So as we moved through the scenario meetings, we referred to this as the area, like what part of the university we were going to service, and the approach, how we were going to go about servicing it. We talked about 2 different areas. For today's conversation, we're just going to focus on central grounds. But the 2 approaches we looked at were whether or not we would design a waste corral that was served by many trucks. That meant each vendor, or each, with UVA Recycling being a vendor, each vendor would come and service each commodity individually as needed. The second approach was to have waste corrals serviced by UVA Recycling and sorted off-site. Under that approach, the idea was that all of the materials would be bagged by commodity and then commingled into a larger container so that these bagged commodities could be brought back to our sorting facility. Because the bags would either be clear or coded accordingly, it would be very simple for us to unsort all that and when we brought it back. Ultimately, that's the approach we decided on, and I'll show you all that in a sec. Next slide, please. So we worked with our GIS folks. They had already mapped out all of our trash containers around grounds, and so we worked with them to learn and identify more information about the 2 areas that we'd chosen. The one in the top center, that's our central grounds area. That is the oldest part of the university and the one that dates back to Jefferson's time. We knew that would be a tricky scenario, so we focused tightly on it. Next slide, please. So in order to do so, we sort of described where that corral would be, as indicated by the arrows below. And we also took a historical look at what were the volumes in that area. How much trash did we generate? How much compost? How much cardboard? How much paper? Et cetera, et cetera. The idea is this will help us actually build out a corral layout. Next slide, please. And so here you can see what we agreed upon as a material flow. As I described, there were two different approaches. The approach that we focused on was having UVA take all of the materials back to Fontana for us to sort. And so you can see in the flow chart where Building Services is able to commingle those bags very early on in the process, which reduces handling for them. We're able to get the material over to Fontana with minimal handling, which improves the process for us. But from there, we're able to bale the materials, or in the case of glass, go directly to the roll-off, which will allow us to take them to market in a much more significant way. We also really recognize that these corrals have a lot of potential to teach, and that's something that we're going to focus on as well. How much signage and things like that can we get away with? And you understand why I'm saying it that way, as we try to spruce up these trash areas. Next slide, please. So this is really our final slide. This is our schedule. This is kind of how we plan to go through all that, starting from the retreats, with the summer being focused on the retreats and the user feedback. This semester being focused on piloting new bins, composting, and that footprint. And then the remainder next spring being focused on kind of piecing those last pieces together. And then we're hoping to do a very high-profile pilot in some of our executive areas that kind of show the entire leadership of the university getting on board with this idea, and then we can roll it out to the rest of our customers. Next slide, please. So that's all for me. We can get to questions afterward, but Kay, can you take it from here?
Hello there. Thank you so much, Jesse. We really do appreciate your that opportunity. And I just have a couple of questions, really brief ones. How many FTE staff does UVA have on the recycling team? And who accepts the financial burden of changing out all of your different containers?
Our team's about 20 folks. We've got a superintendent, 2 supervisors, and the crews that actually work to remove the materials. Right now, facilities management is going to bear the costs of the revamp, but understand that we are charging our customers for a combined trash and recycling service. So inevitably there is a rate for trash at UVA, and that rate for trash also covers the funding needs of the recycling side of the house. So inevitably, whatever charges we take on as a result of this will eventually somehow be passed on to those customers through rates or some other vehicle one way or another.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Jesse. I'm sure there's more questions, and we'll try to address some of those at the end. The next person, Luis Campos, is the Executive Director of Physical Plant for Central New Mexico Community College, with responsibilities for planning, constructing, renovating, maintaining all C&M campuses. Luis has been with C&M for over 16 years, and he serves as the campus liaison for the President's Climate Commitment and co-chairs the Sustainability Task Force, helping the campus to meet its sustainability goals. Louis?
So let me also introduce Asa Stone. She is going to be doing the presentation along with me. She's a psychology instructor and the co-founding co-chair of the Sustainability Curriculum team. She's also one of C&M's distinguished faculty and will be doing the presentation with me to talk about some of our path on what we're doing. Next slide, please. So thank you very much for letting us share our roadmap on how we are trying to get to climate neutral and using our waste as a way to do that. Next slide, please. Let me tell you a little bit about us. We are a community college located in Albuquerque, New Mexico. We have about 28,000 students. We are a complete 100% commuter campus. 67% of our students are part-time. Our average age is 28 years old. We have 1.8 million square feet, and we have 7 campus locations located throughout the district under various jurisdictions. So different cities and different jurisdictions and approval processes. Next slide, please. So our roadmap is sort of following the idea that facilities is the organization that first came up with sustainability at our organization. We really wanted to push sustainability efforts, and it came out of our department. We began working with faculty in a very unique way in placing our campus as a living lab and using our facilities as a way to enhance the educational environment for our students. The faculty brought the students along in the classroom by using many of our facilities and our resources, and we are now all three working together to work with our community to really roll out a recycling campaign for the city of Albuquerque and for the community. Next slide, please. So prior to 2008, we had a minimal recycling program. It was really collecting the cardboard from packaging that comes out of our shipping and receiving, collecting the toner cartridges from the printers, pallets, motor oils from our motor pool, metals that come out when we renovate a building. And so it was very minimal. And at the same time, as I mentioned, we had 7 campuses. We had various waste companies throughout those 7 campuses collecting our waste. We had Roadrunner Waste, Waste Management, we had the City of Albuquerque, we had Jackson Compaction. So all of them were independent, and they were all being charged a fee for collecting waste. Next slide, please. So in 2008, we had asked the President to sign the American College and University President's Climate Commitment, and in so doing that, asking her to sign it, she designated me as the liaison, which I guess meant more work for the facilities department, but it was actually well worth it. And in there we looked at 10 categories, and in those 10 categories, number 8 was our waste and recycling, and we put a plan together that said we wanted to reduce our waste reduction by 20% by 2015. Next slide, please. And we couldn't figure out how to do that because I thought that they would come up with some money, and obviously there was none. And so we had to really think about how can we do a recycling program with absolutely no money. And our thought was, we're already paying for waste. Why don't we go ahead and write a new request for proposals that actually ask them to consolidate the waste and to divert as much as possible and give them requirements through that request for proposal. So we consolidated all our waste and recycling efforts on campus through this RFP. We asked them to evaluate the campus and identify a process, a system, and a method for recycling and for waste. And we wanted them to conduct educational efforts to encourage recycling and diversion. We also asked them to assist us in developing a promotional activity and some events. And then we wanted them to evaluate our recycling efforts that we had, the minimal that we were doing. So in that request for proposal, we put that out. We asked them to look at that. Next slide, please. And we awarded our contract to Waste Management. And we quickly moved towards how do we begin looking at our waste and our recycling. And one of the first things we did was we began training our custodians. We put an emphasis on mixed paper and cardboard because apparently when we wrote our RFP for commingled, there weren't any facilities that actually would take commingled, so we had to start with just paper and cardboard. And we asked them to place bins all across campus to collect the paper and cardboard. And the Albuquerque Public Schools, the K through 12 district, piggybacked off or leveraged our contract and all the public schools also went on the contract with Waste Management, so we got a lot of bang for our buck, so to speak. Next slide, please. So our very first year, we ended up having a diversion rate of 40%, and Waste Management helped us come up with how many, what does that translate for folks, and it came out to 232 tons of cardboard, 11 tons of metal, 11 tons of plastic, 5 tons of aluminum, and what do we save? And so our very first year, we exceeded our 2015 goal, and we sort of became stagnant because we were only working from the facilities end, and at that point we decided we needed to figure out how do we get our students, our staff, and our faculty involved. And next slide, please. And there was a recommendation to establish an academic affairs team, which is known as the Sustainability Curriculum Team. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Asa, and she can talk a little bit about our efforts in working with the faculty and students.
Thank you, Louis. As we go to the shift over to Asa Stone, I just wanted to say that she is a psychology instructor and founding co-chair of the Sustainability Curriculum Committee at Central New Mexico Community College, and she has co-hosted the Recyclemania tournament for the past 2 years and organized efforts to provide experiential learning opportunities through the project. So go ahead.
Thank you. So the Sustainability Curriculum team was the beginning of the collaboration between facilities and faculty, and one of the first formal collaboration in terms of the project was the Recyclemania as a campus as a living lab project. And using that as a platform, we invited faculty in applied technology, math, engineering, and sciences, liberal arts, social sciences, business and informational technology, as well as health and wellness, to create lesson plans to use Recyclemania as a campus as a living lab activities to really connect what we are doing at the facilities level to more of a campus-wide effort in the classroom and beyond. So during the first Recyclemania tournament, we established Mount Trashmore, in which we sorted the collected waste into recyclable and non-recyclable, to use that as a visual piece to educate the current state of recycling efforts on campus. And using that, we were able to improve our recycling rate by 11% to 51%. Next slide, please. And because of that fantastic success, we decided to expand the education component of the Recyclemania by providing education series using film series, speaker series, and service learning activities to really collaborate with students as well as faculty members. Specifically, we hosted an education expo. We invited fourth graders and have CNN students educate those fourth graders. We also had verm compost bins available for students to interact during the education expo. We also invited a construction company to show that recycling is not only an individual behavior, but also could be used as a institutional level behavior. We repeated Mount Trashmore, and we were able to detect some of the behavior changes on campus as well. Next slide, please. Now that we got faculty's buy-in, we were really able to educate students inside of the classroom as well as outside. We hosted a Adopt the Recycling contest to have students be an advocate for recycling behavior around campuses. We also had some students create public service announcements that was disseminated through campus as well. Some of the statistical principal students actually used recycling data that we have been collecting in the past 2 years to analyze behavioral modification and its success at CNM, and provided the data analysis throughout campus. Also, some students created outreach tools from a video to infographic that were presented at student conference last spring. Next slide, please.
So now, as we've been working with the faculty and the students, we've now been trying to figure out how we leverage our recycling and sustainability events to promote community awareness. And so we've been working, we've had our first meeting of bringing folks together. We brought the New Mexico Clean and Beautiful, the Keep New Mexico Beautiful, the New Mexico Recycling Coalition, and we had a meeting to just kind of talk about what were we doing and how can we all work together so that we're not duplicating efforts. And so one of the outcomes of that meeting was trying to figure out how do we all track our waste and how do we measure it. And so that's one of the things that faculty and the community partners are going to work with. They also informed us that there were opportunities for internships for students under some of the organizations that they have. And we're looking at that as well as figuring out how can we partner in offering certification programs at our workforce training center, and how do we expand our educational expo in the next year. And so that's allowed us to sort of really guide us from facilities to faculty to students and then the community so that we can make a big impact on our recycling efforts in New Mexico. And with that, I think we are finished with our presentation, and so we're happy to take any questions.
Yes, thank you so much, Louis and Asa. We have one question about your program. How do you interface with the state of New Mexico's hub and spoke recycling system?
We actually do not at this point, and we are working towards figuring out how can we partner with the different folks. So we are looking at that in the future, and that's one of the reasons why we started working with our community, was we were very siloed, and I'm sure most institutions are, in that they're only looking at their organization. And so our goal was, how do we partner with the community to be able to look at what's happening in rural New Mexico? How can we help in that effort, and can we use some of our students in the educational programs that are happening and out there? So that's something we're working on now.
Thank you so much. So next we have David Paget. David is the Associate Professor of Geography and Director of Geographic Information Sciences Laboratory at Tennessee State University in Nashville, Tennessee. He has developed a geography, environmental justice curriculum with strong emphasis on service learning. Paget is a graduate of Western Kentucky University and the University of Florida, Gainesville. David?
Yes, good afternoon. So our project involves environmental justice, community participation, and it really started off on my part as just being curious about the relationship between African Americans and their interest in the environment. Next slide, please. So this is a 10-year adventure. We had lots of community partners, including some nonprofit organizations, the state of Tennessee, our own metro government. It involves service learning with students in my cartography class and urban geography class. And the students came from across all areas of campus, everything from engineering to urban studies to biology to mathematics. And we got funding in kind from the state of Tennessee and from the National Wildlife Federation and the U.S. Department of Energy. Next slide, please. So as I've said, this started off as really out of curiosity on my part. I read an article by Paul Mahai in 2003 that was entitled Dispelling Old Myths, African American Concern for the Environment. And I guess the myth was, and hopefully it was, not is that African Americans aren't concerned about the environment because for a variety of reasons. One being that many of us are in low and middle to low income households. We're mostly concerned about trying to keep the lights on and more upfront issues, more critical issues for survival than the environment per se. But Mahai's study showed that that's not true. As you can see from the graphic here, that African Americans are very concerned about the environment. But there was one area, as you can see on the left side of this graph, where there is a 20% gap in participation, and that's recycling. And so that really piqued my interest. I mean, what's going on there? What is it about recycling that apparently makes it not practiced largely by African Americans, or at least not to the degree that whites practice recycling? Next slide, please. So, being that my background is in geographic information systems, and when I have questions, I oftentimes assign those questions to my students. So one of the questions that I had was where are the recycling centers in Nashville relative to the black population in Tennessee State University? And so the map that you're looking at, the color scale is dark brown for parts of Nashville that have large numbers of African Americans, of course, going to the lighter tan color where there are few, if any. That T point symbol near the middle is where Tennessee State University is located, roughly. And as you can see, there, even through a casual observation, you can see that there isn't a whole lot of correlation between where the recycling drop-off centers were in 2004 and African Americans. I thought that was interesting, but I'll talk about that more later. Next slide, please. So we got off to a really good start. We applied to the National Wildlife Federation Campus Ecology Program, and we successfully received, I think, about $1,200 in seed money to get started on our mission to develop a recycling program at Tennessee State University and throughout the community. Our original mission was to educate the community, especially the African American community in and around Tennessee State University, to close that gap, so to speak. Next slide, please. Because what I observed, again using GIS, was I was able to obtain curbside recycling data from the metro government, and I overlaid that with census demographic data, and this is for 2005-2006, and I noticed a 20% gap in Nashville between predominantly black neighborhoods and those that are not predominantly black or majority white. So that gap that Paul Mahai observed, I observed here through mapping and overlaying those different data sets. Next slide, please. So again, our objective with the National Wildlife Federation grant was to encourage people in the communities around Tennessee State University and other predominantly black communities to get more involved in recycling, specifically the curbside recycling program. But I realized that we weren't recycling at Tennessee State University, that we didn't really have an established recycling program of any kind. So it would be kind of difficult for us to go off into these communities proselytizing about recycling when we weren't doing it ourselves on our campus. So this is where we partnered with the state of Tennessee, and they gave us some recycling bins and funded, arranged for pickup for paper recycling. And so a group of student volunteers moved the bins around, and what we were trying to determine was where were the places on campus where the bins would get filled up. And so this map that you see here is a map of the bin locations that we located or mapped using GPS, and we monitored which bins collected the most recyclables, and those that did, we left them in place. If we found places where they really weren't getting filled for a variety of reasons, then we moved them to some place so that we could maximize the recyclables. But the main thing we wanted to do through this project was to convince the administration that recycling is a good thing, that it is that's something that Tennessee State University should be doing. But at the time, the administration was not receptive at all. The facilities management was not receptive at all. They saw it as extra work, quote unquote. And it could be because our facilities, our trash collection is outsourced to a subcontractor. And so if recycling is not built into the subcontractor's contract, they're not going to do it for obvious reasons. They're not paid to recycle, so they weren't going to do it. So we weren't getting very far with the administration in around 2006, in spite of our efforts through the demonstration project. Next slide, please. But fortunately, we had a change in administration and a complete change in attitude. And so we got buy-in from the institution, largely because we had a new president, new administration. One vice president in particular was very interested in greening, campus greening, and so we were able to assemble a campus community recycling committee that you see pictured there that included students, faculty, staff, facilities management, metro government representatives, nonprofit organizations, and so on and so forth. So beginning in 2007, we really thought we would get some form of recycling on our campus. Next slide, please. But before we could establish a recycling center on campus that would also serve the community had to be convinced that we weren't dumping on them. That first slide that I showed you that showed that there were hardly any recycling drop-off centers in African-American neighborhoods, the reason for that was not because there wasn't an effort on the part of metro government to place recycling centers in black communities. The problem was that the black community in Nashville has had such a long history of environmental injustice, going from the Interstate 40 being constructed through the Jefferson Street corridor and destroying the oldest and most well-known black community in Nashville, to a landfill being placed right in the middle of the black community of Bordeaux. Both wastewater treatment plants are in black communities in Nashville. There was a waste cogeneration plant that just spewed toxic air pollution, and I could go on and on. So when the metro government went to these black communities and said, hey, would you like to have a recycling center? All they heard was trash. They didn't hear recycling, they didn't hear green, they heard trash in our neighborhoods and just totally turned the city back. So in order for us to establish a community university recycling center, we had to convince the community that this is a good thing, that it's recycling, it's not a dump. And so we had a series of meetings. As you can see in these pictures, we had community leaders. We had one advantage that we had was that a lot of the community activists were TSU graduates, or their children or grandchildren attended TSU. So once we put the TSU brand on a recycling center, that pretty much smoothed things over. Next slide, please. So appropriately on Earth Day 2008, we opened up our recycling center. As you can see it pictured there. It's on the campus, but it's open to the community. So it's just like any other recycling drop-off center in the city, except that it's maintained by both Tennessee State University and metro government. We take all 7 types of plastic, cardboard, mixed paper, all colored glass, aluminum cans, so on and so forth. And so presumably the proceeds will fund scholarships at TSU. Next slide, please. However, after a couple of years, for reasons that were inexplicable, our recycling center was shut down, and then what was downsized to that single bin from what you saw on the previous slide, and eventually there was nothing there. It was completely shut down. Also, at the time, we had another change in administration around that time, and so we had an interim president who wasn't really friendly to the community or friendly to anything else that was going on outside of TSU. So I suspect that that's part of the reason the recycling center got shut down. I've heard other things, but I've never gotten a straight answer. Next slide, please. But then we had another change in administration, and our current administration, the new president, President Glenda Glover, is an alum of TSU. Immediately after her arrival, we started to see these recycling centers re-emerge throughout the campus. Paper, bottles, aluminum cans, and I can say just through anecdotally that the students are using them. They're always full. I've heard that they're even doing some programs in the dorms where they're trying to educate some of the students on recycling. And I should have noted this in the first place. Tennessee State University is an historically black college university. We have about a 90% African American undergraduate population, and so this is just all part of that process of engaging not only African American people in our communities surrounding the campus, but our students who are largely African American, many of whom are from the South, many of whom are not in the practice of recycling from their hometowns. It's an education process for them too. We get a lot of students from up north, Michigan, Ohio. We have less trouble convincing them to recycle. And matter of fact, the students who come from outside of the South are often curious about why we don't see as much recycling as we do in the South. And I've often relied upon those students to take a leadership position in exposing the students from the South to recycling and its benefits. Next slide, please. And then in February of 2014, for reasons that I still am unaware of and I really don't want to know, but I was at the Alternative Center, and on the left-hand side you can see that I was there recycling, and I saw the sign that you see that said this center will be relocated to TSU campus. I don't know why. I don't know whose idea it was. I'm not going to ask any questions. I was just happy to see the recycling center return last February to Tennessee State University, and so since then it's been open, operating, and been very, very heavily used. Next slide, please. So we do have, I would like to do some research now that we are up and running fully. I would like to map the spatial distribution of the recycling facilities in Nashville now and local demographics. We've had a lot of changes in terms of demographics in the last 10 years in Nashville. We're one of the fastest growing urban areas in the United States. And I would just like to see where the recycling facilities are versus local demographics. Hopefully I'll get one of my students to take that on as a project. I would like to go back and map the participation in the curbside recycling program by race and income, in essence replicating the study I did in 2004, 5, and 6. I just haven't had an opportunity to do that, but it would be interesting to see if that gap has been closed any. Also, I would like to do two things. During the process of trying to convince the university to engage in recycling, I had a math major, and she actually calculated the amount of money that TSU would save if we recycled. In other words, instead of paying a vendor to take our trash away, we would take a lot of that material out of the waste stream, and we could actually make a profit off of it through recycling. And she did a really good study. I can't remember the numbers. I think it was $80,000 per year. I'm just guessing, but it was a large number that really got the attention of the administration at the time. And so, unfortunately, or with colleges and universities, especially state universities, in these times, tighten our belts with the way budgets are. The greening of the earth is not necessarily going to motivate most administrations, but saving green dollars, that'll get their attention right away. You know, if you can prove or show quantitatively that recycling will save the college money, or then you'll get the attention of a lot of administrations. Going to them with the message of, oh, it's good for global warming and it's green and we can save the earth, that's not going to get administration's attention, not nearly as much as saving money, which is what she did with that study. And I would like to do that again. I would like to do a waste audit, and also do the mapping of the recycling receptacles on campus. Because what I've heard anecdotally is that the dorms still are struggling. The dorms are some of the worst places for recycling for some reason. That might be another question that we could look into in the future. Well, why is that? Why are students less apt to recycle where they live versus in the buildings where they go to class? I don't know the answer to that question. Next slide, please. Next slide. Well, I guess that concludes my presentation, and thank you very much.
Thank you, David. That was great. We really appreciate it. Due to time constraints, we're going to go ahead and get with Lena, and then we will answer a few of the questions at the very end, depending on time. So, Lena, she is our final speaker, and she is a solid waste and recycling manager for Johns Hopkins University Homewood campus. Her career in sustainability at JHU has taken her from developing outreach programs in the Living for the Future program, then the Office of Sustainability, to her current position managing the recycling program. She received her bachelor's in public policy from St. Mary's College of Maryland and her master's in environmental science and policy from Johns Hopkins University.
Thank you.
Lena?
Thank you, Kay. Good afternoon. I want to thank CURC and Keep America Beautiful for inviting me to speak today, and my fellow presenters for sharing their experiences in creating lasting change at their institutions. All of the presenters and programs that you just heard about involved many stakeholders from many different areas of the campus and the community, and this, as you know, is often challenging. I have the unique experience of having worked in sustainability at Johns Hopkins for 8 years and now in operations for over 2 years, which has afforded me the opportunity to be on both sides of that change management. The goal and desire to improve waste reduction, diversion, and education on college campuses is thankfully usually present already when stakeholders convene. However, the perspectives, communication styles, timelines, and fears are as equally diverse as the stakeholders' backgrounds and positions themselves. I think my life on both sides of the trenches makes me uniquely qualified to shed some light on how important building trusting relationships among stakeholders is, and how to understand and approach your colleagues to make change on your campus. So when I say operations, I use the term broadly to include anyone who is responsible for the day-to-day operations of campus, whether it's managing food service program or keeping the lights on in the housing buildings. And when I refer to sustainability, I mean working primarily on the big picture policy and outreach side of things. I'm sure that some of you do both of those, so you probably will understand the challenges and the approaches that I'm referring to in my presentation a little bit better. Before I launch into my presentation, I want to put out a disclaimer that I am speaking only for myself and my experience, but suggest that there may be others out there who have made similar mistakes as I have and could learn from them. Just so you know, I'm still apologizing to my predecessor in the recycling office for being a royal pain in his butt when I was in the Office of Sustainability, because I had no idea what it was like to be in operations. Next slide. So, how many of you have ever thought this? If you say you haven't, either I don't believe you or I really want to work with you. In order for us to forge ahead and meet our campus waste reduction and diversion goals, we have to work together, and the best way for us to do that is if we want to work together. This, however, requires a kind of relationship building in which we don't run and hide when we see each other coming. There are lots of behavior change theories and approaches that have been studied and written about. But honestly, what I've found in my time in sustainability and now in operations is that the most effective approach to encouraging people to change is listening and understanding. And food, that too. If we're going to collaborate effectively, we need to have a good relationship, one in which we are comfortable being honest and upfront with each other and find some common ground. Next slide. So as I said, in order to build a working and lasting relationship, we need to trust each other, and to do so, we need to understand each other's perspectives and how to work within our differences. Again, that disclaimer, the thoughts and views expressed in this presentation reflect Leanna House's experiences only, and not necessarily those of any other recycling manager or sustainability coordinator who has ever lived and or worked on a college campus. So, in sustainability, obviously change is fundamental. The focus is definitely on the long-term sort of end game, more so than the immediate short-term goals. Cross-collaboration is the norm. So people in sustainability are used to working with all the various stakeholders on campus, whether it's the top of the administrative ladder, or down to the student level or the community. They're just used to working across those silos. There are also lots of meetings because there's so much cross collaboration, and obviously sustainability is the mission. It's the reason for their existence, and so that is their core focus. However, in operations, stability is critical because we have so much riding on keeping things operating. Change equals risk, and we want to minimize that risk. Our focus is generally tends to center on the immediate term, meaning that day or that week, and particularly not getting complaints on a daily basis or weekly basis from the campus community about missed pickups or smelly dumpsters. We also tend to work more independently or just in our small teams, which is much more comfortable because we are we work with them very closely, and we understand the daily struggles of the shops and the facilities teams. We also may have to reschedule a lot of those meetings that the folks in sustainability are having because we were literally putting out fires, meaning vehicles on fire, kitchens on fire, buildings on fire, or the opposite of fires, which we've had a lot here on the East Coast, which is cleaning up leaks and floods. And in this day and age, usually most of us on the college campuses care very much about sustainability. However, it is often seen as an extra add-on to keeping the campus running every day. Next slide. So now that we have a little bit better understanding of our colleagues' perspectives and comfort zones, let's talk a little bit about how we can adjust our approaches and attitudes so that we can build that trust and a more productive team of change agents. If you are in sustainability, do you have quantitative goals for recycling rates or waste per capita? Are there target dates to meet those goals? Have you included the operations unit that manages waste in those conversations about goal setting? You'd be surprised how many goals are created in a vacuum, and in those conversations be sure to provide the context of those goals and targets, including the who and the why. Is this important to the student body, to the administration? Is there a publicly stated goal and accountability for meeting that goal in a certain time frame? Are there benchmarks that could allow for slower, less risky change? And if so, clearly communicate all of these things. Which leads me to fear and risk aversion. Everyone always says humans are change averse, but I don't believe we are. If we were, we wouldn't get married, buy a house, have kids, change jobs, etc. What we fear is risk, so what may come off as disinterest from your operations partners may be more related to fear of risk, that change will lead to instability and things not running, and of course operations getting blamed. Because that as soon as things don't work, we're the first to get the phone call. So just be sensitive to that fear of risk, and rather than assume it's just being dismissive. Finally, be prepared for a longer timeline than you would prefer and anticipate delays, as those vehicle fires and floods will take precedence over changing programs. But staying on track and on target is really what's important, so be patient. Now, if you're in operations, think really hard about those barriers that immediately come to mind when someone from sustainability or somewhere else comes and asks to make some change to your operations. I have learned, as I mentioned, that I had no clue what the day-to-day reality of being in operations was. Just managing my fleet of vehicles and equipment alone can keep me busy. There are real barriers to introducing change into our routines, but we need to be honest with ourselves and recognize when those barriers are real, or they're just perceived or business as usual status quo that we've never questioned if it can change, or is it simply an inconvenience? If you have concerns or fears, you need to communicate them to your sustainability partners or even other operations partners so that you don't come off as just being dismissive. Remember, we're building trusting relationships, so open up a little. With more information and more heads trying to come up with a solution, we are much more likely to work through the fears and come up with a solution that will allow us to get back to sleep at 4 a.m. when we wake up freaking out about a new collection system or, God forbid, fruit fly infestations from adding compost bins to kitchens. Finally, be open to the potential that change will solve an existing operational challenge. A great example at the Homewood campus came from our housing office during move-out, where they were paying thousands of dollars in overtime labor and dumpster costs to deal with the junk left behind when students move out. Once they realized that holding an end-of-the-year collection drive, which they were previously averse to because of the time and energy that would require of them, once they realized that it would lead to less stuff left behind for their crew to pick up and fewer dumpster pools that they have to pay for, it clicked that this idea was actually an operations solution with a sustainability benefit. Believe it or not, we do not operate at 100% efficiency, and there may be better ways of doing things. If a better way exists and it happens to be more sustainable, then awesome. The motivation for change does not have to be altruistic as long as the outcome is good for everyone. Next slide. So in summary, for you visual learners with a little more hard-earned advice from me, communicate openly, early, and often. Be open about the why and share concerns. Talk early to plant the seed for a future program and often during the planning, execution, and monitoring phases to share any concerns or delays. Set mutually agreed upon and hopefully shared goals. These may be internal or public, but for them to stick, there needs to be shared accountability for their success. And integrate sustainability into operational missions and integrate operations into sustainability missions. This requires significant and often sometimes slow cultural change, but champions inside the silos are critical. Personally, I've taken my own advice. It's been a long road learning it, but I'm really proud and pleased with the relationships that I have developed across all of the silos on our Homewood campus and that have strengthened over the last years that I've been here. They're one of my greatest accomplishments and assets because they are lasting and they're reliable, and I can depend on them for years to come to keep making better and more evolving change on our campus. Next slide. So change is happening, whether you like it or not. Better to be on the front end of it and work collaboratively to shape it rather than lag behind. And as I said, building lasting relationships with your campus partners, and then after you've built those relationships and you've had a successful program, go have a beer together and just celebrate the progress that's been made. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Leanna. I appreciate it. And we now can go to our Q&A. And I have several questions that folks have asked. And we're going to go to Jesse with UVA on the first one. Who distributes your bins and cans on football game day to tailgate areas? And does the athletic department supply the cans and bins inside the stadium arena?
Well, that's one of the parts we're working on. In the past, we had distributed recycling bins for events, and then Landscape had distributed trash receptacles. In the future, we are going to distribute and pick up trash and recycling from all those events. Now, that's true for the exterior of the stadium and those parking lot operations. And then inside the stadium, I'll say it's a little more of a partnership between finding containers that make sense for athletics as well as ones that are going to work for us. But until quite recently, they were responsible for the entirety of their operations within that footprint, and we're looking to expand into there as well.
Thank you. That's great. And so does this extend to special events like tailgating, graduation? And you kind of summed that up. So I think we were able to get a couple of those answered at once. The next question that I have is where is your organics composted, or where are they composted? And what is your compost collection fee and overall collection rate? That's for Jeff.
Your first question is easy. Your second question is hard. the first question is, how does compost get collected? We work with a local facility named Black Bear. They have grown their facility to the point where they have recently exited the pickup business. So they have picked up a partner called NOPE, I forget what it's called, something Organics Processing for the Environment, and they are now our compost pickup service. Because that change just happened, and because right now our compost billing is, I'll say, distributed across campus, so each entity is paying their own bill, I don't have a great number for you for what our compost cost is.
Okay.
What I can tell you is it's changing as a result of the NOPE transition, and I don't think it's going down.
Okay, that is great. Thank you so much. So we're going to go to C&M. Having non-traditional students has posted a challenge for a community college to get students involved. Did your approach, how did you approach this? Did you do it through curriculum completely, or were you able to implement any other activities?
To answer the first question, we found that it actually facilitated students because we have a large population of non-traditional or returning adult students. Typically, students are interested in acquiring professional skills through extracurricular or curricular activities, so we do not find that to be an issue or barriers.
That's great. That's really good. Thank you so much. Also, C&M, how are your figures for waste and recycling calculated, and are they hard numbers or estimates based on number of volume containers, pickups, etc.?
We actually have waste management as part of their requirement under the contract. They have to provide those estimates. Currently, it's based on volume and number of pickups. We have not been able to, because of the way they pick up, and they also collect the Albuquerque Public Schools on the same route. We haven't been able to separate it yet, but we're working on trying to get that, and that's one of the reasons why we were moving to meet with our partners outside to figure out what is the correct way to collect, and all of us be consistent on our efforts. The City of Albuquerque has one way of estimating, and we have a different way, so we wanted to create a very unified, consistent way of calculating our waste, and so certainly waste management does that for us, and it's based on estimates.
That's great. Thank you so much. TSU, this is at you. Did you research the number of members within communities of color that live in multifamily dwellings? Because if recycling is not, this is what the questioner asked, if recycling is not offered to those community members, then it wouldn't be part of their daily life or become part of their culture. Is this what you're finding?
Actually, in the communities around Tennessee State, it's almost entirely single-family houses. But the Metro curbside recycling program it only goes to single-family homes. It doesn't go to multifamily dwellings, which is a whole other issue. But one of the things in talking to our local residents that was a barrier is that we have a lot of elderly residents in and around our campus. I mean, it's essentially the same people who have lived around here since the 1960s and 70s. And a lot of them said that they didn't recycle because they couldn't push or manage that large bin. And that was the barrier. And so they were asking if the curbside recycling program could collect more often and have smaller bins. We haven't been able to convince the Metro government to do that. So there's still these very large bins. We tried to get our student environmental organization to volunteer to some of the elderly residents to go out and push the bins to the curb. I mean, that's basically where the problem was. So hopefully we can get our curbside recycling program to be collected more often locally. You know, that would solve that problem. not just for elderly people, but for a lot of people. But right now, I think it's just once a month.
Thank you, David. Here's a question that goes out to everyone. Have any campuses successfully banned selling bottled water? Anyone?
We have.
This is Jesse Warren at UVA, and our answer is no.
Okay.
We're the same. The answer is no. What we did was we actually put hydration stations all around campus and then started working on trying to see if we could see a reduction, but we have not been able to ban.
That's a similar approach at Johns Hopkins. We've actually tried to put the hydration stations strategically near where people would buy water, so that not only are we providing, you know, the source of getting bottle-free water, but it's, you know, it's juxtaposed with where you're going to be spending money, a lot of money for water. So that's been our approach.
Thank you. Let's go ahead and move to our next program. I have a few closing housekeeping notes to share with everyone. Following this webinar today, you should receive a prompt to complete a quick survey about the conference. We encourage you to take a minute to give us feedback on today's program. On the next slide, we have one more webinar program in our 2015 series. Our next program in December will be quantifying your waste reduction efforts. So how do you measure nothing so that you know you are doing something? At the core of waste reduction is the simple notion of less. We promote reduce, reuse through the programs, brochures, posters, social media, and websites. But are the efforts making a difference? Is there actually less waste on your campus? In this webinar, we will highlight programs quantifying successful waste reduction programs and using the data to improve the program. For full details and to register for this and the December program, please visit CURC website at www.curc3r.org. The next slide. For those of you planning to attend the ASHE Higher Education Sustainability Conference this fall, plan to come a day earlier for the CURC Annual Zero Waste Workshop. The all-day workshop will be hosted on the University of Minnesota campus on Sunday, October 25th. The program will include case study presentations, roundtable discussions, a tour of the school's recycling program, and opportunities to network with fellow campus recyclers. Please note, this coming Tuesday is the deadline to pre-register for the workshop. To sign up, you'll need to go through the ASHE Conference registration system. Learn more about the workshop on the CURC website. Lastly, I really want to thank everyone who gave their presentations today. It was very insightful, and I know I learned a lot. We also want to recognize our sponsors and partners for making these programs possible. Thank you to Waste Management for sponsoring today's program, as well as Alcoa Foundation for supporting the overall 2015 series. Finally, our thanks go out to KAB for the planning and logistical support, and ASHE as a promotional partner to the series. Again, we can't say enough for our presenters today, Jesse, Louis, Asa, David, and Leanna. Have a great afternoon.